This month's seminar, though, is by Leanne Holmes, who is the only consultant nurse working in severe asthma, and she's dedicated to promoting the delivery of high-level standards of clinical care to people living with both physical and the psychological burden of severe asthma and respiratory disease. She's presented nationally and internationally at scientific conferences, being both the lead and co-author on multiple research papers in the realms of severe asthma. And Leanne strongly believes that exploring patients' lived experiences improves the long-term outcomes in care and empowers nurses to advocate effectively by ensuring patient stories are heard. So welcome, Leanne, and I'm really excited to hear about your seminar on research and how you got here and all the wonderful things that you're doing.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Steve. Can I just check if my slides come through okay? Get a thumbs up.
Yeah, perfect.
Fantastic. Okay. So thank you, Catalys, for asking me to come along and speak today. Little bit sort of controversial, I thought, the title, in saying that I never thought research was for me. But honestly, once upon a time, I really did not think that research was something that I would be interested in. And I like to hope that by sharing my own personal journey, that it might inspire some people out there that are sort of thinking along the similar lines, and how I've gone from not being research involved to now being in a role where I'm half clinical, half academic, and entering towards the latter stages of my own PhD. So what I want to talk about today is sort of my own personal journey and a little bit about my research and some of my own reflections and thoughts, and then I'll look forward to questions at the end. So as part of my PhD, I'm doing something called photo elicitation, where I've done interviews, which I'll talk about in more detail shortly, but I've done interviews asking participants to choose pictures or images that helps to explain their experience of what it is living with severe asthma. So I thought I'd turn the tables around a little bit and provided my own pictures of how I feel my PhD can be described in a few pictures. And looking back on some of the other Catalyst webinars, there's a bit of a common theme, really. It is not a straightforward linear journey. As you can see, I've chosen a roller coaster in the first instance. There has been so many ups and downs. Downs thinking about having imposter syndrome. I can't do this. I don't know how to do it. This isn't happening. That's not happening. This is taking too long. And then absolute highs when things go well as well. I also feel at the start, for my personal journey, it's quite a lonely experience. Very much felt you're a little bit on your own in a big, vast space ahead, not knowing where to go or what to do. And that has definitely changed. I think from the MCAC and now Catalyst and the support that's out there, there's a lot more available support, which is fantastic. Constantly juggling. I think having a clinical academic role, I feel very much like I did when I first came back to work after having my son, in that I felt guilty being at work when I should have been with him, and when I was with him I felt I should have been at work. And it's a bit like that with the clinical and research, in that when you're doing your clinical work you feel like you should be in research and vice versa. So it's really learning to juggle and manage that. And then the last picture is, it isn't all downs. There's a lot of ups, and the sense of achievement in the work, especially when you get to publication, or in my point of view, you make a difference to patient care, then it really is worth doing it. So that's sort of a bit of a little insight into my PhD in pictures and my research journey, actually. So I want to start taking you through what actually got me really involved in research, and I would like to think that this is the same for everybody that's on this call today. This is a little extract from the acknowledgement of my MRes at the start. And I think what's always driven me in my research is basically seeing what our patients go through day in, day out. The spirit and the drive and the determination that I have that keeps them going when it can be pretty rough out there. And the fact that we can actually make that difference and help to support them is what drives me. And I think for me, research really is that opportunity to make the difference and to get that patient voice heard, and to understand that research really is a part of patient care. You're not directly there on the shop floor delivering the care, but it really does massively impact on patient care ultimately. So my journey started, crikey, 28 years ago, and I'm one of the old P2000, Project 2000 diploma nurses, and I graduated in '98. And It was around 2000. I was getting married, I needed extra money, and I was doing bank shifts left, right, and centre to save up for the wedding. And I ended up doing a bank shift at the research unit. And it was at this time where I was like, this is not for me. I literally spent the morning collecting blood pressures. And from there on in, I think that was my sort of impression that nurses were there to run around to collect data for medics. And I was just like, yeah, no, not for me. And I never went back and did another shift, and I never really thought about research for quite a while, which I had a really good manager who supported me to convert my diploma to a degree, and I'm from a very working class, non-academic background. I was the first person in my family to get a degree in professional nursing studies in 23. Which I was really proud of. And then it was 5 years later, I actually got a specialist nurse post in severe asthma, where I started to then become exposed to research. And as you'll see, that really was sort of a pivotal time in my research journey where I started to see that research really can make a difference. We were recruiting at the time for bronchothermoplasty, which was a treatment that had never been used anywhere in the world before. We were part of international studies for that. And I also was introduced to Janelle York, who was a professor of nursing at Manchester then, who was doing some studies looking at CBT group therapy, and I got involved in helping to recruit for that. And still don't know how it quite happened, but ended up presenting at the European conference some of the data from that. And it really opened my eyes to research and the difference that we can make for patients. And it was Janelle that actually introduced me to the NIHR scholarship for a master's in research, which I did in 2014 and 16, which I'll talk about in a little while in some future slides. Once I'd finished my master's, it really opened up my eyes and made me realise that I can make a difference in patient care from doing my own research. So I decided to apply for the NIHR Bridges Fellowship. And at that time, it also gave me I had 1 day a week dedicated time to start to prepare a sort of a PhD application. And it gave me the time to actually write up my MRes study into a paper, which is really difficult trying to do when you're working 100% clinical. So that protected time was really invaluable. And it really helped me to draft my PhD, which was looking at young adults' experiences with severe asthma. So it was in September 2019. I decided to apply for clinical doctoral research fellowship for the first time. That opened up some quite challenging conversations because part of the fellowship you had to agree that once you'd finished the research there was a post, so it was then starting to have those conversations about how we would go from a specialist nurse to a consultant nurse, finances, etc. But we got the support and put the application in, and I did get to interview, which I believe is a major success on first attempt, but unfortunately I didn't get the funding. So I went again in September 2020, and in January 21 found out that yes, they felt it really was a good application. It was fundable, but unfortunately, and a real kick at the time, that there wasn't enough money in order to award that for me. So it was great to realise that they thought it was fundable, but sadly really bad to hear that there wasn't enough funds. So I took the advice on board and I changed the application again, and in October 22 I resubmitted and got a no this time. Which was really frustrating because I'd literally, at the recommendations at that point, it took me full circle to the original application I'd put in 2019. But hey ho. It did open up those conversations, and in November 2022 I applied for and got the nurse consultant post in severe asthma, which is now a clinical academic role that I am still in at the moment and hope to be for a very long time. So once I started the PhD, I was very lucky to, it was through the MCAC, they had some money from the MFT charities, and they actually awarded me, after applying, my PhD fees. So I started that in April 2022. But the issue then was I didn't have the money to actually do my research at the time. So I decided this time to go for a research for patient benefit NIHR application. And then also through contacts I had through sort of national research contacts, somebody told me about the Burdett Nursing Trust, who were putting a call out for respiratory funds as well. So I submitted applications to both of them. Again, I didn't get the NIHR RFPB. They felt it was a little bit too ambitious, and on reflection, I think it probably was a little bit too ambitious, but I did get the Burdett Trust for nursing, and I got £64,000 in order to do my PhD, which I was really pleased with. And in January 25, so literally 13 months later, I actually got the local approvals to start my study. So it was a long time coming. It should have run for about 6 months, and we've had to extend it quite a few times due to recruitment issues. And I have just finished last week doing the final part of my actual physical activities. So that's a little bit just about my research journey and how it's got me to where it is, and the ups and downs. And basically I think it shows how you need to have that resilient and tenacious nature sometimes. So my master's in research is really what sparked my interest in research and really got me getting my teeth into research and taking me down the journey that I am now. And this all came basically from very much a patient-centred insight. So I ran a patient support group with one of my other nurses, Rachel, where we'd bring patients together, we'd do an education session, and then it would allow them the opportunity to speak to each other, get support from each other, and just share that lived experience and the highs and the lows of living with the disease. And it was in the context of the support group that somebody brought up the topic of intimacy, and they basically said, yeah, but nobody talks about that, nobody wants to hear about that, but there is issues. And it really got me thinking, oh, okay, well, no, that's not something that we discuss in clinic, but this clearly is an issue. And that's what became my MRes, exploring intimacy in relationships, how it's affected by severe asthma. And I did an interpretive phenomenological analysis of that with Janelle York at the time, who was my supervisor. And I interviewed 9 patients, very in-depth interviews. And what the results found, there was 4 overall arching themes that came out of it. Physical intimacy, physical limits was a massive issue for the patients, not just the physical act itself, but all the things around it, being a young sort of kid and not being able to sit and have a long snog session with your partner at the time because you can't breathe, or not being able to go and buy nice underwear because you don't want that restriction of what you're wearing. Emotional intimacy was very much that emotional struggle of not being able to give your partner perhaps what they need, and the real sort of negative emotions that came with that. The image itself basically looked at body image battles. So I can remember a couple of the patients actually spoke about having tiny mirrors because they just didn't want to see their whole body. They just only want to see a small part of that. And also the change in relationship roles. I can remember one partner saying it's really hard where one minute you've got your partner being your carer and the next minute they want to be your lover. So there was that real sort of confusion of the change in relationship roles. And then a few people spoke about the role of the healthcare professional and what the perceived support requirements were. And I think this is where it really made a difference for me and how it affected us in clinical practice. And what one of the patients said, and this is a direct quote, is that basically, if I'm not going to tell you, but if you ask me, I will tell you. And I've took this to a few conferences, I've published it, and people are aware that it's something that we do need to ask, that this is a massive issue for patients. And patients do appreciate being asked about these things. They just feel it's very nervous to bring up and ask. So that's sort of a little bit how I feel that my MRes has impacted upon clinical practice. And that came about from a patient-centred insight. So my current PhD that I am doing, and it's the only one I'm doing, is exploring the experiences and support needs of young adults with severe and uncontrolled asthma. And why is it important that I felt I needed to do this? And I think ultimately this came from me is that my son is now 23 and he's a well young man, but just seeing him growing up as a teenager and into a young adult, it really is a very challenging, turbulent time for a healthy kid. And I just thought, for any young adults that also are going through this with the disease on top, what is their support needs? What are their experiences? How can we improve care? There's a lot of talk and focus on transition of care where we transfer young adults from paediatric services into adults, but what we're doing as adult services that really makes a difference for this group, or where can we improve? And that got me thinking. The other reason I felt that it was really important that I did this study was young adults are more likely, that have asthma, are more likely to die in the UK. And there was a study back in 2019 that basically showed the outcomes of young adults in severe asthma were worse when compared to European counterparts, and internationally, which is just not acceptable, because there should be nobody dying of asthma in this day and age. We know that balancing the daily challenges of adulthood and the psychosocial development, as I've already said, can be really difficult, and then superimposing asthma into that is hard. Asthma also significantly affects a lot of people in the UK, about 800,000. The evidence out there, what evidence is out there, shows that there are increased risk of anxiety, depression, less likely to take treatment, are more likely to have emotional problems, and are more likely to have exacerbations and hospitalisation. There is often a lot of negative emotions associated in this cohort: living with the disease, being lonely, being panicked, frustrated, fear of death, low self-esteem, and that then can impact upon physical symptoms. And we know that in the world of asthma that emotional worries and concerns can actually exacerbate physical symptoms, and the two can interplay on each other. There's a lot of direct and indirect costs. Obviously, the indirect things such as school, education, have a massive impact, and then obviously the direct impact both on quality of life as well. And also, it's very difficult to extrapolate outcomes for this cohort because the young adult by definition is aged 16 to 25. Often what happens is data is either encapsulated in under 18s or over 18s. So again, trying to find information out there and data for young adults can be really difficult. So that's why I felt that I really needed to go down the road I was going down, and chose to look at the experiences and support needs of young adults as part of my PhD. So this next piece of work, although it isn't directly part of my PhD because I didn't do the statistics, it really did help to justify why I want to do my research, and this was published earlier this year. So the UK Severe Asthma Registry, it's basically a database where across the whole of the UK, any severe asthma centres with patient consent input basic demographic clinical data, medication use, healthcare use, exacerbations, lung function, airway inflammation, quality of life, into the registry. And I went to them and said, basically, I wanted to explore young adult outcomes and compare them to other age groups. So the research question we had is, what are the outcomes of young adults in the first 12 months of entry into adult services? And what we found was that young adults basically accounted for 8.4% of the total cohort of asthma patients that were in the group that we analysed, which was just over 2,000. And we found that they had, young adults had a higher range of anxiety and depression, so 15.7 there in the 16 to 25 age group, compared to 4.9 in the older age group of 71. And as you can see, as the ages increase, the anxiety levels do go down, which sort of correlated with research that was already out there. We identified that adherence to inhaled corticosteroids at baseline was suboptimal in this age group. Only 71% were regularly collecting their inhalers from the pharmacy. And to have good control of asthma, we would expect patients to have at least 80% adherence in collecting their inhalers. So that was an issue in this age group. We looked at accident and emergency attendance, comparing across the age groups, and what you'll see from the bottom chart here, the blue bar is the baseline, so basically what the ED attendance was at the start of when they entered into the adult service, and then the yellow bar, sorry, the orange bar is what happens at annual review. And what you'll see is the young adults, both at baseline, had the highest rate of accident and emergency attendance at 59.7%. But even after being in the specialist service for a year, 34% were still attending ED. And even after multivariate analysis, this still remained significant. And then when we look at intensive care ventilation episodes, so as sick as you could possibly get, what we found that it was actually the two younger age groups, to the age of 16 to 25, had the second highest rate of ICU ventilations at baseline, but it was the 26 to 39-year-old group that had the highest invasive ventilations. And for me, again, this justified my PhD. It helped bridge that gap in knowledge, and it really showed that we needed to do more to understand what is happening with this cohort and how we can make a difference. excuse me, and this takes me to my PhD, which is looking at the outcomes, experiences and support needs of young adults with severe and uncontrolled asthma. For those that are unfamiliar with severe and uncontrolled asthma, basically by definition, severe asthma is when asthma is still uncontrolled. Patients are needing regular steroids, needing hospitalizations, despite the fact that they're on maximum treatment and they're taking everything. Whereas uncontrolled asthma often relates to the fact that there could be other issues driving the symptoms. They might not be quite taking the medications as prescribed, or they could be exposed to living with allergens, they could be smoking, but they're still on maximum treatment but still getting symptoms. So the first thing I did was a qualitative systematic review, looking at the psychosocial experience of living with severe asthma, which I'll talk about shortly. I then did one-to-one interviews using photo elicitation, followed by a focus group, and then more recently we have just undertaken a theory of change. I think at this point it's really important to acknowledge that a lot of this work has been done alongside a patient advisory group. I really think that patient public engagement is absolutely important, that they should be involved from very offset of doing your research, and if I could do it again I would definitely involve them even earlier than I did, but yeah, they've been invaluable. I've got a patient advisory group who I love working with, and they are brutally honest and tell you exactly what they think, but they really do help to shape that research. So my first part of work was the psychosocial experience, looking at what it's like living with severe asthma as a young adult, and the question was, what is the psychosocial experience? When I say we, that was myself and Siobhan, who was my speech and language therapy consultant, who's also on a PhD, and we ended up screening 6,545 papers, which we read all down to 68 full text. We used systematic review software, which was really helpful to do that. And then we ended up with 10 final studies of 219 participants. It was actually 11 studies, but 2 of the studies basically were reporting the same study in different ways. The age range from 6 to 55, with the mean age at 21, and we said we would include anything from 12 to 25, and that a proportion, as long as 80% of the cohort included that age group, would include them. And it was half female. We did thematic analysis and ended up with 5 analytical themes, 17 descriptive themes, and 73 codes. So the age was 8 to 27, the sample size was 6 to 55. When we broke our themes down, the analytical themes were the main themes that came out of it, and within each analytical theme that you'll see written on the right, you have on my left, you have your analytical themes in red, and then alongside them on the right is the descriptive themes, so how they sort of fit into each other. So the first theme was looking at a constant uncertainty. So this was looking at the unpredictability of symptoms, how it impacted on education, on finances, how having sort of lack of control on external factors, and just how it constantly lived that life of anxiety, of panic control. You know, is my asthma going to go? Is there ever going to be a cure? Am I going to live with this all my life? And that really did impact on life quality. Second analytical theme was the deleterious emotional impact of asthma. So that was very much looking at fear of dying. There was patients talking about basically being scared of going to sleep because they didn't want to die. A real sort of conflict on medication, recognizing that it does help and it's needed, but also not wanting it because you want to be different to, or you don't want to be different to the rest of your friends. And then also acquiescence was the third theme, basically grown from personal experience, taking ownership, accepting the diagnosis and the treatment. The fourth theme was looking at the need for support and understanding, so dealing with the burden of others' ignorance, needing support, needing that individualised care, having to deal with people thinking because you're coughing in public it's contagious, and then also the constraints, the fact that chronic illness is ever present, people often taking a head in the sand approach, just trying to ignore the symptoms, and again living with that unpredictability, but also want to be seen beyond the diagnosis as well. So that was a summary of my systematic review, which takes me on to my semi-structured interviews using photo elicitation. And basically, vote elicitation is asking participants to choose visual images to help explain what it's like living with their disease. So we recruited between January and October last year. They had to be a young adult under the specialist centre at Liverpool or Manchester, and they had the option to be face-to-face or online, and we did one-to-one interviews. I did analysis from interpretive phenomenological analysis from Smith et al. And there's 6 different stages, which I won't really have time to go in today, but basically you familiarise yourself with the data, you draw out on individual themes on each separate individual interview, and then you look for connections across them, and then you organise them into groups and tables, and then you repeat that process across other interviews, and then eventually come out with your ultimate group experiential statements. And I ended up with just short of 8 hours of interviews. It was quite a challenging group to get to talk, and I think having the pictures was useful in getting them to talk, because you focused on the pictures rather than the participant. We had 13 patients in total that consented and took part, with the average age of 12, 77% female. We had a good mix of ethnicity, all severe and uncontrolled, and the quality of life scores were quite low. Adherence to treatment was okay, but they had high airway inflammation in that group. And just a couple of examples I want to talk through. So this is from one of my patients where one of her themes was just looking at the day-to-day impact, and you'll see the picture here of the person looking out the window, and basically she was saying within the context of that picture it describes the mess about the room, of how she wants to get up and clean and tidy but she's too exhausted, and she also spoke about being that person looking out the window watching others live their lives as well, which I found really quite sad. The impact of not being able to sleep, just being desperate to get to sleep but not being able to, because you just can't get your breath, and that picture I think really does speak 1,000 words and summarises that. They spoke about the impact on education, so again relating to the same picture of looking out the window, but basically the books were also signifying that loss of education, and how they were too busy having to deal with their asthma to focus on the education, and how that then impacted on life. And then this picture here, basically, again, she's saying that although she had amazing family support, you might have people around you, but actually you are still on your own. You're still sort of fighting your own battles in your own head. And then I also included the taking in control, because what I really liked about this quote was that this is why I wanted to do this study. This is why I wanted to share my story, to basically to help others and to help people understand. And then when I brought together sort of all the group themes from the 13 patients, these were some of the main themes that came across. So medications, concerns about taking them, about being dependent, about having to learn to accept to take them, the fear of side effects, and also a real massive worry about failed treatments and how that psychologically impacted on people. Just the daily restrictions of living with the physical limitations, massive emotional, mental health impact, anxiety, stress, fear, unpredictability, living with uncertainty, because 1 minute asthma's good, 1 minute it's terrible and you're in intensive care. Isolation was very much described, feeling alone, in living with it, and the burden, being different to peers, being different to friends, being different to people in the waiting room. There was a real positive element about taking control, about accepting your diagnosis, accepting that you need to take medicines, exercise, diet, look after yourself. There was some, unfortunately, very bad, poor healthcare experiences of not being listened to, being dismissed, being seen as young, not understanding, not being expected to understand what you're dealing with, and missed opportunities for early diagnosis came out. Dealing with the ignorance and poor perception of others, the fact that it's often seen as an invisible illness, and also impact on work and education. And another positive aspect that came out was the positive benefits of both family, friends and specialist services. So that's currently going through more detailed analysis as we speak, but it's just an overview of a snapshot. I did one focus group where basically we were going to do 2, but was only able to recruit for 1. We had 3 patients turn up, and 5 consented, and they recognised very similar problems, that basically they didn't feel they'd been referred quickly or listened to by the GP. Again, mental health issues, having to fight for care, quite a few significant issues surrounding emergency department care. the impact of poor sleep, and again the impact of poor perception of others, and they came up with lots of recommendations that we're currently working through and considering that I'm writing up, which I haven't again got time to go into today. My final piece of work was a theory of change, and basically what a theory of change involves, for those that don't know, and this is what we did last week, is where you get all stakeholders in a room. So last week I had adult consultant for severe asthma, paediatric consultant, nurses, psychologists, pharmacists, representative from A&E, a patient youth worker, and also a couple of patients, and we sit around a table and basically go, okay, this is what we feel is the issues out there. I sort of presented a brief overview, as I have done today, of what I found, but then looked at what they felt was a problem. We then agreed on what we felt was the ultimate problem. And then from there, you basically backwards map and you go, okay, well, if this is the problem, what is our ultimate solution? What is it that we want to do? Blue sky thinking, what do we want to do to be able to have the best goal in the world to achieve this? And then you work backwards, looking at how you're going about doing it, what resources you need, what your barriers are, what your facilitators are. And you end up with a massive big coloured board, as you can see there, full of 100 post-it notes that then helps you to show a flow of how you go from a problem to an ultimate solution, rather than going, okay, we're going to try this to see if this helps with solving problem X, Y, and Z. So from my point of view, these are just some of my reflections about my own personal research journey, and hopefully this might help people that are sort of sat listening to me today wondering whether research is for them. I think sometimes initially I felt that it was very much a lonely world. Very much felt a little bit on my own. Luckily I had some support around me, but that has significantly grown, and I think that's some accumulation of developing my own networks and support network around me, but also the fact that now we have Catalys and we have those supports around there. The Association of Respiratory Nurses, I'm involved in their research education committee as well. So really being surrounded by enthusiastic individuals and having the right people, I think really makes a difference. And I think for anybody that's thinking about research, is make sure you get those people around you, because it really does help. Research plans definitely change. I took the advice as written from every NIHR application, and on reflection I think maybe I might not have changed some things. I think it's good to take that advice and listen to it, but also have confidence in your own decisions and be able to justify them, because ultimately you do become the expert in your area. But it's listening to the advice, but also being confident in yourself. Patient public engagement is absolutely essential. Like I said earlier, having them involved from the earliest stages, really bringing that patient voice into your research really helps to shape it and make it much more easier and approachable. If my patients hadn't said to me, for example, for my photo elicitation element, don't just use photos, make sure you get them that they can choose pictures online, I would not have recruited the amount of people that I recruited, because over half my participants didn't want to use photos, they wanted to use pictures. Everything definitely takes longer than you expect, and factor that in. You know, I got my funding, it took me nearly 14 months to get the go ahead to start recruiting for my research, but things just take a long time. If you're putting in grant applications, it can take all the time to prepare it, but just as long to get feedback and outcomes from that. And grant rejection, it can be brutal. I've been there 4 times where I have worked my socks off and got no's, but I think it's definitely character building, and it really does ultimately make your research stronger. And I strongly believe if I hadn't have got the no's I hadn't have got, it wouldn't have got me to where I am now, where I did get my grant application finally accepted, and I am here doing my research now and speaking about it today. Having clinical and academic demands can be a challenge, but it's about being organised and remembering, like I said before, that research is still patient care. Again, getting the funding can be harder work than the PhD, but again, it's about keeping up to date with the funding streams through Catalys, through your research networks, and again, being surrounded by the people that can share that information. I wouldn't have known about the Burdett if I wasn't involved in the ARNS research network. Research is definitely an MDT approach to care, and I often say that to a lot, is that when we're doing clinical care we have an MDT, and it's the same for research. I see things very differently as a nurse than a medic would, than a pharmacist would, and we need that different perspectives from the MDT. it really does give you the opportunity to be that patient advocate and get their voices heard and help to understand their experiences. It's definitely a constant learning curve. I would say embrace technology. As a 50-year-old technophobe, if I haven't used Confidence for my systematic review or NVivo for my thematic analysis, then I would be very much drowning. I think they really were game changers for me in my research. And I think the most important thing is don't just look that should say don't just look ahead and see what you need to do, but actually look behind you and see how far you've come, because I think sometimes it's only when you sit and reflect and go, okay, no, I have really achieved quite a lot. And finally, I think it's just really important, and again, this is another extract that came out of my the start part of my MRes, is the acknowledgement to the patients that are involved in the research, and that stands now for the current studies that I'm doing, that the fact that patients are prepared to take their time and share their story and be involved really does make mean the world, and help to get their stories heard as well, and be able to represent them. And also massive thank you to my supervisory team, my clinical team, and everybody that's got me to the point that I am. So thank you for everybody online that has been here listening to me talking today. And is there any questions?
Perfect. Thank you very much, Leanne. That was really interesting to see the journey that you've come on. Whilst we wait for the group to warm up, if you do have any questions, please use the Q&A feature to type your question, and we can put them to Leanne. To kick things off, though, you mentioned Janelle York and kind of getting involved in the work that Janelle was doing. And I certainly, from my experience, find those kinds of people a bit of a game changer in terms of their trajectory. And I wondered whether you had any advice about how you find those types of people. How did that interaction come about for you?
I think for me it was definitely getting into my specialist role. Respiratory is a very research savvy background, but I think again also that was over 10 years ago, and we didn't have Catalyst around, we didn't quite have MCAC around at the time, where I think now people can approach their research champions. There's so much more guidance and support out there, so I think it's down to us to make sure that people, I'm the Whitworth lead research champion, but it's about making sure that we are available out there to support people and can go to as the first point of contact, so that we can then signpost. Because, you know, for example, when I worked on the wards, research was not something that was really massively discussed, and there was nobody around it. I don't know what it's like now. I've not been on the ward for a long time, but I still feel like, you know, we can do a little bit more to support on the wards. So I think, yeah, I was very lucky and I was very fortunate, but I think also things have moved on, and there is a lot more support out there. It's about going through Catalyst and the research champions. Does that answer the question?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. I asked that question a few people, and it's I think quite a wide range of answers to it, really. So that's really great. I have another question. You presented some nice data that around 70% of people aged 16 to 25 struggle with adherence of accessing their corticosteroid inhaler. And I wondered whether that is a problem of them, given the age group that, you know, they're in school, they're in college, they're in their early careers. Do they struggle to get to, say, the pharmacy to collect their inhaler, or is it more a problem that they're just that fatigued of having to do it that it kind of de-incentivizes them a bit to keep on top of it?
I think it's possibly a combination. I mean, that was just one of adherence measure. We've got a lot more technology now where we can put chips on inhalers and all sorts to remind people. But that, from an adherence measure, was basically looking at how many inhalers they're picking up from pharmacy. So if somebody's regularly taking an inhaler, they should be picking up 12 a year. And often this is where they were picking up 6 or 7. I think with asthma it's really difficult because it's a bit like that nursery rhyme: when it's good it's very, very good, but when it's bad it's horrid. And I think for anybody, we know that trying to take medicine regularly, particularly when you're symptom free, can be really hard and challenging. And that, in relation to costs, in relation to then sort of becoming an adult, having to take that responsibility and accountability, not wanting to take it in front of the friends, there's so many factors around adherence. and I think in young adults that's sort of some of the points. It could be the cost, it could be not want to take it on with friends, it could be that remembering to take it. There's also a lot of the blue inhalers, which sort of help to relieve symptoms. We now know that they used to be prescribed on their own and often used quite a lot, and we know actually that we need to get people taking the steroid inhalers more so, because that's the most important thing to focus on, but it's changing that behaviour as well. So there's a massive drive to change behaviour and educate and support people.
That's amazing. I'm fascinated to hear that you can put chips on inhalers. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I have one final question because we're running out of time. And probably a quick fire question. You touched upon it briefly, and I think you handled it admirably with the rejections from your fellowships. If you were advising somebody now in a similar position, what would be your top 3 pieces of advice that you'd give that person?
What, in putting in a grant application or dealing with rejection?
Dealing with the rejection.
I think you're allowed to feel sad, annoyed, frustrated, upset. I think that is part of the grieving process almost. But then I think it's a case of, okay, taking a deep breath, taking the reviewers' comments on board, because these are very experienced people that have reviewed them and put forward suggestions. And I think, like I said, for me, some of the advice was great, some of it I felt I had to take on board, but actually on reflection, I'm like, maybe I didn't need to do that method. So I think it's really reading the reviewers' feedback, sitting down with your team again and looking and going again, and also being aware and accepting that these are really competitive. I was told that I was fundable, there just wasn't enough money. So I think that got me through as well. So definitely allow yourself to feel sad, frustrated, upset. That is allowed. You've put your heart and soul into doing this. Take the advice on board, surround yourself by the people that have helped you to pull it together, shake yourself off, reevaluate, and also accept that you've still been amazing in putting it in, and that this is competitive and you're not going to give it every time, but keep going because you get there eventually. Have proven that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Leanne. That was a fascinating in-depth look really at a fantastic career. So thank you for taking the time to
Pleasure.
that. It was really exciting to hear. So that is the end of today's seminar. Just to remind you, you can get in touch with us via any of the routes on the screen. There are resources available by some of the web links. And if you are interested in the research leader development call, there's a QR code. And of course, you can always join Manchester Catalys or reach out to us at any time. Thanks for joining.